Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. As you're signing in, there should be a poll on the screen, and we'd love to know who's attending, whether you're from a resettlement agency, child welfare agency, a school or educational organization, a law enforcement, anti-trafficking organization, health or mental health, government, legal, community-based organizations, or other. We'll give you a minute to kind of fill this out, and then we will see the results. And yeah, thank you. For today's webinar, our title is From Arriving to Thriving, Supporting Refugee Youth in Success in School. My name is Sean Dino, and I am one of the trainers and resource specialists with the USCRI Refugee Youth Resource Center. Megan Rafferty is our mental health subject matter expert. She is co-facilitating with me today. And we're also joined behind the scenes by Laura Weiss, who is our program manager at the Refugee Youth Resource Center. If you would like to follow along with our slides today, or if you'd like to refer to them in following trainings, you can scan the QR code below in the bottom right here to get access to those slides. So without further ado, let's move forward. Who are we? We are U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. We were established as a non-governmental, non-for-profit international organization in 1911. USCRI is dedicated to addressing the needs and rights of refugees and immigrants, and we work with nearly 200 affiliates in all 50 states, as well as internationally in El Salvador, Honduras, Kenya, and Mexico. Our organization is broken up into several different departments. We have refugee services, policy and advocacy, legal services, anti-trafficking, or trafficking services, what it's called, but we work at anti-trafficking, international programs, and child services. The Refugee Youth Resource Center is a part of child services, and we are a national training and technical assistance initiative. When we refer to training and technical assistance, we're talking about webinars like this one, targeted trainings for providers like yourselves, case consultations, and our resource website. We'll talk about all of those a little bit at the end of our presentation here, but we are an ORR funded program, which ORR stands for Office of Refugee Resettlement. And our goal is to build provider capacity to foster refugee youth resilience, integration, and child safety. A few housekeeping things before we move forward in the presentation. We, first of all, would love your participation throughout this webinar. There'll be many different opportunities for you to share your thoughts. And there are two different ways that we'll be doing this. The first is through the chat function here in Zoom. That will probably be the easiest for all of you. So please feel free when we open up the chat to start sharing your ideas and your experiences. And then the other is through Mentimeter. There'll be ways for you to join us as we move forward, and I'll talk about that in just a second. We also would love for you to put any questions that you have into the Q&A function here in Zoom rather than in the chat function. We'll do our best to try and address them as quickly as we can. And for those who are late to joining here, Laura has just put a link to our slides. So if you want to follow along or if you want to refer to them at another point, you can just look into the chat and click on the training library link. So for today's webinar, we have a goal of hoping that you walk away being able to recognize how challenges newcomer students face before and after arriving in the U.S. can affect their adjustment and success in school. Second of all, that you will be able to explain educational rights, responsibilities, services, and supports available to refugee youth and their families. And lastly, that you'll be able to identify practical strategies to support the social adjustment and academic success of refugee youth in schools. So without further ado, let's move forward to the global story. Before we talk about newcomer students in the US, it's important for us to kind of provide some context. For this, we want to start our webinar by discussing what education looks like around the world and what refugee youth experience before coming to the States. So before we jump into what that looks like, we want to define who are refugee youth. The term refugee youth, as it relates to the Refugee Youth Resource Center, includes any displaced young person between the ages of birth through age 24. These are children from various immigration statuses, whether that be refugees, asylees, humanitarian parolees, victims of human trafficking, and more. And in the United States, refugee youth may be referred to as resettled youth, newcomer youth. These can be also referred to as cross-cultural kids or third cultural kids, kind of referencing the fact that many refugee youth have had significant exposure to 2 or more cultures before the age of 18. You might have also heard them referred to as English learners, also sometimes called English language learners. And then the last term here is emergent multilinguals, which is a term that provides more of a positive framing to the discussion in terms of the strengths that refugee youth bring with them rather than the deficits. As we look at the countries of origin for refugees, asylees, special immigrants, and parolees, it's important to note that the statistics that we have are for both adults and children. And the statistics that you see on the screen are for the last decade. As we see, Ukrainians make up the largest demographic at almost 33%. Together with Afghanis, these two countries kind of represent almost half of all admittance in the last decade. And the top 10 countries, including Haiti, Cuba, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, China, Myanmar, Syria, Iraq, and Venezuela, represent 84% of all admittance into the United States. Speaking about countries, we thought it would be helpful to give a sense of what refugee youth might experience in the classroom in their home countries or host countries before arriving in the States. This can help us to better understand some of the challenges that they may experience in adjusting to school here. And so let's walk through these. The first is teaching styles vary from memorization and exams to discussions and critical thinking. For instance, in China, there are high standards and it's a very competitive academic system that really focuses on memorization. Kind of on the other side of the spectrum, we have Ukrainians who come from a very a school system that focuses largely on student-centered approaches to learning that allow parents and children to choose what type of education best meets their needs. This could be formal, informal, and even non-formal options. Another point here is that when students come to the United States, we kind of take for granted the use of computers and other technology, but newcomer students may come from schools where books were limited, let alone computers and other forms of technology. The second point here is that newcomer students may come from countries where teachers were allowed to use physical discipline. As a result, some newcomer students may be afraid to interact with teachers. They may be afraid to ask questions, and they may even be afraid to get an answer wrong. Next is that education may be limited or obstructed in rural areas. This can be due to the fact that students have to go long journeys across mountainous and treacherous terrain in order to get to schools, or it may be long journeys that they have to make to school itself. The fourth point here is that girls and minority groups may be excluded or forced to conform to the dominant culture. For instance, in Afghanistan, girls and women are forbidden from pursuing secondary and higher education. But if a family values education and has the money to pay for a tutor, some girls continue their education in private at home. The last point here is that war, persecution, and violence of all kinds ravage communities and can lead to rigorous educational systems being damaged and disrupted. For instance, in Syria, which had a really robust education system before the civil war, they now have over 5,000 schools that have been damaged or destroyed. Teachers are paid low wages or inconsistent wages. And then there are close to 2.5 million children out of school, with another million at risk of dropping out. As we move to what education looks like in host countries and refugee camps, the first point here is that access to education varies from host country to host country and from rural to urban settings within those countries. Over 70% of all refugees are hosted in low to middle income countries, which means that those countries have a hard time meeting the needs of their own citizens, let alone an influx of refugees. The second point here is that nearly 50% of all refugees globally are not attending school. A third point here is that legal status impacts access to school. For instance, Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh and Malaysia don't have official status and thus cannot take part in school. Fourth is that financial burdens of displacement can lead students to drop out of school. In the instance of one Congolese boy in Uganda, he had to move between the capital and the refugee camp every year in order to receive aid. And this happened at the exact same time as final exams every year. And so instead of finishing each grade and moving forward, he had to repeat the same grade multiple times and was at high risk of dropping out because of that. A fifth point here is that frequent changes in curriculum and exposure to multiple languages of instruction can lead to confusion for students and limit their ability to really master the content. And then lastly, when students are put in classrooms with national students, there can be a higher risk of bullying for refugee students. So at this point, we're going to jump to our first interactive discussion today. This is using Mentimeter, and there are three ways that you can begin participating here. First is that you can scan the QR code that you see on the screen. The second is that Laura put a link to this specific Mentimeter in the chat, so you can literally just click link there and it will take you to that page. Or you can go to menti.com and type in 83, 84, 90, 36. So as I will open up the window here, and already we have some participation coming. Thank you all for participating. There's a lot about language being multilingual, bilingual, resilience is curiosity, perseverance. These are all really important. Thank you all for participating. This is great. I love seeing it just continue to populate. I think some of the other ones that I see in here as it's quickly moving around are leadership goals, supporting each other, their adaptability. Yes, thank you all. You can keep that window open, and we'll be moving through Mentimeter with some other questions in the future. But as we move forward, let's talk about the strengths that refugee youth bring. You mentioned a lot of these in the mentor, but as you, so if you put in the mentee that a lot of refugee youth are multilingual communicators. We at USCRI love referring to multilingualism as a superpower newcomer students possess. In today's world, this is a huge asset. In fact, that it opens doors that are closed to people, including opportunity to network and connect with people who share that same culture, as well as opening up opportunities for work. Second point is that having had exposure to two or more cultures before being in the States often means that newcomer students have an expanded worldview, are able to see things from different perspectives. This goes the same lines. Newcomer students have a cross-cultural awareness, being more appreciative of those of other cultures, making room for the inside and out of the classroom. This is something that I mentioned from the mentee that you all were talking about, supporting each other, them being able to see and make room for others is another strength. You all talked about their adaptability and their mobility. And so generally speaking, the experiences that newcomers have heard lead them highly adaptive and mobile, having grown up in and been accustomed to new situations and adapting in that. Additionally, newcomers are observant, an extreme awareness of their surroundings, oftentimes noticing details that others may overlook. And finally, the last point that we really want to highlight here is that with friends and family throughout different countries and continents, newcomers are more tuned to and connected what is happening around the world than other students in the classroom. With this, we have a better understanding of what refugee youth experience before arriving to the States. Let's transition now to newcomer students and their adjustment in U.S. schools. So for this section, I'll hand it over to Megan, who will continue going forward with the presentation.
All right, thank you so much, Sean. So let's go ahead and move ahead. As you know, as Sean has been sharing, as we've seen so far, as we know, refugee youth can have varied life and academic experiences prior to their resettlement. They come from different cultural contexts, different educational backgrounds, and bring their own unique strengths and resiliencies. But I want to start this section by briefly touching on some common challenges that refugee youth may experience in U.S. schools, just so that we have some greater awareness of what youth might be facing. So first, of course, is simply that newcomer students are likely adjusting to an entirely new learning environment and set of expectations. Not only do students need to learn the curriculum, but they also have to learn the culture of their new school, which is just an additional barrier and challenge. Second, many newcomers don't speak fluent English when they first arrive in the US, And so language barriers can also present a challenge to academic success. So even if they have the algebra down, trying to express that in English is an additional challenge. And also, I would say keep in mind that younger kids often acclimate and pick up language much faster than older kids. So this can be even harder for those high schoolers that we work with. Schools throughout the US will have varying numbers of newcomer students and different amounts of resources available to support these students. Some schools might experience a lack of resources or expertise in working with newcomers, which can make it harder for students to get the support that they need. Again, that's really, it'll vary based on each different school. And then the events that refugee students have experienced prior to their arrival in the US can, of course, still be impacting their adjustment after arrival. If students have experienced disrupted or limited schooling, they may arrive behind grade level and spend a lot of time trying to catch up to the classes that they're placed in. Students may have had negative experiences with education systems in the past, leading them to have some hesitation engaging with school staff in the US. And finally, we know that refugee students may have experienced traumatic events in the past, which can have impacts on their current academic success. So we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail now, talking about the impacts of past trauma on students. All right. So, as we've discussed in our previous monthly webinars, newcomer youth have often been exposed to multiple traumatic events throughout their pre-migration, migration, and resettlement journeys. And it's our job as service providers to take a trauma-informed approach and recognize the impact of trauma on our clients and students. Once we can understand how trauma can impact learning, we can then begin to adjust our approach to meet youth where they are. So we're going to begin by looking at the academic impacts of trauma on newcomer students. So students with trauma histories may experience difficulty focusing, remembering, or processing new information. They may experience hypervigilance or startle responses that can disrupt their learning. They might have fatigue from poor sleep that limits their attention. Low confidence or fear of failure that might reduce classroom participation. Difficulty completing tasks or following multi-step directions. And then also we just want to note that learning progress can fluctuate from day to day. It's not always just a super linear trajectory upwards. So recognizing these signs as trauma responses can allow educators and other providers who support them a deeper understanding of what's going on internally with the student, and it can allow us to adjust our responses. Okay, so now that we've discussed learning and academic performance, let's look at how trauma can show up in a student's behaviors. Behavior is often, I think of behavior as communication, and communication can be easily misunderstood. So when we're working with young people, I think it's really important to always be asking ourselves, what is the message behind this behavior? Or how else might I consider this behavior? What are they trying to tell me? And how might their previous experiences be part of this behavior? So, for example, newcomer students with trauma histories, they may appear anxious or withdrawn, but sometimes that might actually be accidentally misread as the student being uninterested or unmotivated. Newcomer students may also be easily distracted or easily triggered, which might be misunderstood as them misbehaving or clowning around. Newcomer students may have a mistrust of authority related to some of their past experiences. So imagine if the newcomer student had experienced some government corruption or abuse in the past. This might lead to conflict with teachers or administrators, and we might see increased discipline referrals. There may be difficulty with transitions, so students might appear disorganized or oppositional when in reality, changes or things that are outside of their control might just be feeling unpredictable or threatening. Students may have multiple unexplained or unexcused absences, which could actually be due to physical or somatic symptoms that are really common among newcomer youth, like headaches or stomach aches, which these are actually just a physical expression of their trauma, but can still lead to students missing classes because they don't feel well. So let's remember to ask more questions or try to look at things with maybe a different light as we're looking at things like unexplained absences. And then finally, newcomer students might avoid new or unfamiliar activities, missing out on opportunities to learn and connect. All right. Socially, trauma can, have a big impact on trust, attachment, and peer connections. Newcomer students may struggle to trust peers or adults in school. They might isolate, or they might only connect with peers that are from the same background. In younger children, they might have some separation anxiety, and they might cling to parents or trusted adults, which we can see especially at morning drop-off. Students might feel different or ashamed about their refugee identity, especially in schools with a lot of other without a lot of other newcomer students. Or I've also seen this in schools that have a major sort of clash in socioeconomic status of the student population. Newcomer youth may misread social cues, or they might overreact to teasing. And finally, they might be hesitant to ask for help or advocate for themselves. So, looking at all of these together by understanding the academic, behavioral, and social dimensions, we can create trauma-informed environments where newcomer students feel safe, seen, and supported. All right. So now that we have taken some time to explore who refugee youth are, what their educational experiences and trauma-related challenges might look like, we want to try to bring these ideas to life with a brief case scenario. So we're going to take a look at Vlad's story to see how some of these dynamics might play out.
Hi, my name is Vlad. I am 18 years old. My family and I fled Ukraine because of the war in the west of my country. We crossed the border into Poland, and we were placed in refugee internment camps before we were granted parole in America. Thanks to how quickly we were resettled, I only missed a couple months of 10th grade. I have been here for 2 years now, and am going to graduate high school with classmates my age. Math is my favorite subject, and I want to be a computer engineer. In America, my grandparents live with my family, and my father drives trucks across the country for long stretches of time. My brother has cognitive difficulties, and my mom is stressed out all the time. She says I am depressed from seeing my country burning, but that is what happens in war. She also thinks this is why I do not talk much at school, even though I understand English well. I know most of my classmates are applying to college. I am thinking about applying, but I don't know where to start. I do not know if my family's parole status will be extended, so I am not sure I should apply.
All right. So now we would love to hear from you. We've got a discussion question up on the screen, and we'd love it for you to put your responses to this in the chat. So what are some ways that Vlad's history of trauma and forced displacement might be impacting his educational success here in the US? All right. And we will just give you all a moment to open up the chat and write in your responses. But again, imagine seeing Vlad in his US classroom. How might his history of traumatic experiences be showing up for him? So I'm seeing some responses come through, a loss of hope, uncertainty surrounding his status, unclear future, isolation, his motivation and willingness to engage. Sounds like he might have some low self-esteem. Unknown status can cause a lot of fear, and I'm reading in response that this is really common. We're seeing this a lot with Ukrainian students right now. Normalization of systemic oppression, depression, unknown future. Yeah, I think folks are really picking up on some depression symptoms with Vlad. Doesn't seem like he has a sense of belonging, and his mother's stress is really impacting him. He's having anxiety. Yeah, thank you all. These are all really great responses. I feel like you gained a lot from Vlad's story. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on to our next question, and we'd love to hear from you all. What strengths did you observe with Vlad? So what do we remember from the case scenario? What were some of his strengths that we might be able to draw on? All right, and I saw he has good math skills, English language skills. Oh, a lot coming through. He's a good student, intelligent, loving computer science, resilience, adaptability, even that he wants to go to university, that's definitely a strength. He's socially aware of his family's challenges. Yeah. He's well educated. This is great. Thank you all. He's got career goals. Yes. Fantastic. Thanks so much, everyone, for your answers, for engaging with us. We really appreciate it. All right, I'm gonna just go ahead and move us forward. All right, into our next section. So I'm going to hand it back over to Sean to discuss educational rights and services for refugee youth. Over to you, Sean.
Yeah. Thank you, Megan. And as we begin to dive deeper into the topic of newcomers in U.S. schools, we want to discuss the important rights and services available to them. So as newly resettled youth arrive in the States, federally contracted resettlement agencies, also known as RAs, are really tasked with the facilitation of receiving these new families and assisting their integration into the local community. You yourself may work with an RA or an affiliate of a resettlement agency, but for those who do not, in broad terms, RAs offer services to newcomer youth and their families that help them to acclimate to life in the U.S. While we could go in depth about what RAs do and could talk a lot about that, for today's conversation, the most important services that RAs provide to newly arrived youth include enrollment in school for all school-aged children, coordination of initial medical appointments and care. This is could be helpful if they need to be screened or vaccinated or these sorts of things that schools often ask for. And then the third thing is that they provide a cultural orientation, which includes U.S. school systems. So the RAs will try to orient the new family, the young person, to their new surroundings, and that can be different depending on what city they find themselves in. As schools work to integrate newcomer youth into the classroom, they must do so in accordance with federal laws and certain legal decisions. One such a Supreme Court decision is Plyer versus Doe. And in this case, the court ruled that every child has a right to free public education, regardless of their immigration status. The Supreme Court also said that schools cannot deny entry or discourage participation to students depending on their immigration status. And then lastly, of importance here is that schools cannot request information for their documentation purposes, such as citizenship or birth certificates or these sorts of things that would would not necessarily be able to be provided by all families depending on their immigration status. The second here is the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act of 1987. This is a piece of federal legislation that establishes educational rights for youth without a fixed nightly residence. So they may be staying in motels, they may be in tents, they may be moving from place to place, couch surfing. This act particularly provides services to youth in situations like this that include immediate school enrollment, transportation to their local school or school of origin. So a family or an individual might prefer to stay at a certain school, but they are out of that particular district. There are also free school meals that are provided for them. Whatever fees or costs that they may be associated with attending school or certain activities, they're waived. And then there are referrals to other community services in the local area. As well, there is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Law versus Nichols, and then there's the Equal Educational Opportunities Act of 1974. And all of these really get down to the fact that schools must try to provide evaluations of English language learners in a timely and valid manner to identify who needs that extra assistance. They must then take the appropriate actions to ensure all English learners can access the same content as students who are fluent in English. And lastly, that they place English learners in classes with students their same age to avoid unnecessary segregation. A couple other laws or orders to reference here are the Executive Order 13166 and Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015, which really mandates all federally funded agencies and subgrantees to provide language access services to all those that they serve, and then that schools must translate all information they provide to parents. So now that we've kind of talked about what laws are in place and what we as whether we work at a resettlement agency, school, or community-based organization, it's one of our responsibilities to assist families and educate them on what to expect in U.S. schools and the services available to them. So some key points that we want to highlight here that we can be discussing with newcomer youth and their families include how students and teachers interact with one another. They may have different experiences based on their country of origin or their host country. Next is class schedules and transitions. It's important to note that for some newcomer youth, they might be triggered by the loud bells that come at the end of every period. And so it's good to kind of let them know ahead of time so that they can be prepared for that and not taken off guard. The next is class selection and electives. For some newcomers, the option and process of course selection may be a completely new experience to them. Next is homework and testing. The approach to testing may vary from what they're used to, especially if they're used to memorization that has been prioritized over critical thinking and creativity. Next is the adjustment to locker use and changing clothes in front of others. This might be really unfamiliar to them if they haven't had a gym time or such. The next would be student and parent responsibilities. And rather than spending some time here, Megan will be discussing a little bit more on this in the next section. But on top of what to expect, it's also helpful to really talk to families about what are free and low-cost services that are available to them that they may not know about. For instance, transportation to and from school, free and reduced lunches, English as a second language courses, counseling, tutoring, special education, and individual educational plans. For this is particularly of importance for families with children of special needs that may be unfamiliar with or maybe encountering these for the first time. And so we want to do our best to allow all children to have the best access to education. Next, for parents who work long hours, it's helpful for them to know about programs like Head Start or other childcare options that are available to them. Again, after school programs and extracurricular activities can help newcomer students to build community and foster a sense of belonging. This is something that Megan talked about in the last section. And then adult education can not only be something that we talk about for parents themselves, but for older students who may not want to continue in a formal educational setting, or they want to work, and so they can continue their education in other ways through adult education. So there are two other federally funded programs that we want to highlight here for newcomer youth and their school success. These programs are first, Refugee School Impact, and the second is youth mentoring. These are federally funded programs that are distributed, the funds for which are distributed to each state to implement these programs as they see fit, while offering them a lot of flexibility on how they implement these programs. When it comes to Refugee School Impact, the goal here is to help refugee youth and their families adapt to U.S. schools, to help them succeed academically, to provide access to childcare, and to aid in social adjustment. In the Portland metro area where I live, resettlement agencies coordinate care for Refugee School Impact for a program called ORCAS, or Oregon Refugee Children Assistance Services. When it comes to youth mentoring, these programs can look like mentoring between an adult and a young person, or peer-to-peer mentoring. They can also be done individually or be done in groups. For instance, the last organization that I worked with was granted funds from the state of Oregon to run a one-on-one youth mentorship program where community members, adults over 18, were paired together with newly resettled youth, and their age could range from 13 to 24. And the goal was for them to meet 3 to 4 times a month and help them to achieve personal goals and build community in their new home. So drawing on your experiences, we're going to open up the chat again. And we want to know, what are the ways that you have seen Refugee School Impact and youth mentoring implemented in support of refugee youth school success in your local areas? So with the chat open now, please write your answers, and we can all learn from each other about the various ways different states implement these programs. Maybe we're having trouble getting the chat going. ELD classes that include graphic novels. That's a really cool way to engage students through the visual and the linguistic. Youth mentoring in Texas. Yeah, tutoring, language interpreters, language acquisition and navigation, educating families about schools. Yeah, transitional programs for newcomer students. special programs, ESL classes and careers, uh, culturally dynamic after school programs. That's really cool. Clubs run by new American students open to all students. Yeah, getting them to build relationships and network with each other. Career and college assistance. Uh, Art projects. As an artist, that's near and dear to my heart. Yeah, these are all really great. We'll keep the chat open just a little while longer so you can continue to share and learn from each other's experiences. But let's move on to a bit of a case study here. So now that we've discussed the rights, programs, and services available to newcomer students, we've prepared a video about a newcomer's experience adjusting to the U.S. school system. So here is Dashnia's story.
Hi, my name is Dashnia. I am a 16-year-old girl from a rural village in Iraqi Kurdistan. I arrived to America a year ago through the Special Immigrant Visa Program because my father worked with the American military. My family and I cannot read or write in our native Kurdish language, but I love telling stories and I greatly desire to learn. Back home, I never went to school because I helped my family a lot with responsibilities like cooking, cleaning, and taking care of my younger siblings. When we first came to America, I was so excited to go to school for the first time. I was enrolled in 10th grade, but I am falling behind in every subject. I haven't been able to learn English yet, and I have trouble following along in my classes. My school is far away, and it takes me 2 hours each way on the public bus to get to and from school every day. Sometimes I get headaches because I didn't get enough to eat. At home, my parents are proud I go to school, but they can't help me with my homework because they are learning English too. My father has big health problems, and my mother stays home to take care of him. We don't receive or earn much money, and my older sister and I are starting to feel like we need to drop out of school and find work to support our family. I love cooking, so maybe I can find a job in a restaurant.
So now that we have listened to Dashnia's story, what are some of the challenges Dashnia faces in adjusting to schooling in the U.S.? The chat should be open still, so you can start writing your answers in there. Yeah, language barriers, financial issues, transportation, educational gaps, lack of previous education, gendered obligations. Father has health problems, yes. The first-time student, yeah. Schools far away from home. Cultural shock, yeah. Lack of available resources in the community. Yeah, these are all really important things to kind of be aware of as we're thinking about how would we be able to help Dashnia. So the next question is, what services would you recommend to support Dashnia in achieving her educational goals? So with all that y'all shared, let's kind of think about the services and ways that we can support her. Private tutor, yeah, tutoring and vocational education. Yeah, programs like School Impact, yes, very much so. After school programs, mental health services, peer mentoring, yeah. English as a second language, mentoring, counseling. Match her with a mentor if possible. Social emotional support group, yeah. Connecting her to community-based organization that can support her in the community, yeah. After school programs, yes, it's important. She needs a school bus or some sort of transportation assistance. Um, help her find a part-time job after school that could really ease her mind and help her family. Apprenticeship programs that pay. What a great suggestion. So again, we'll keep the chat open. Thank you all for participating. We will have a few more discussions here coming up. Adult education, yeah. We'll keep the chat open and you can learn from each other a little bit. So with that, we're going to move into a knowledge check. So at this point in the presentation, we've shared a lot of information and we want to give you an opportunity to see what you've retained. So with the same Mentimeter link that you've used before, we're going to open up the next question. So the first question for our knowledge check is, which of the following are potential impacts of trauma that refugee youth may display in school settings? So the answers that you can choose from are become easily distracted, difficulty remembering or processing new information, misreading or overreacting, struggling to trust adults in school, or none of the above. So as we show the results, yes, it was very clear that all of you got the correct answers. Every one of these is a potential impact of trauma for newcomer youth. So going to the next question. What services are all publicly funded schools required to provide newcomer youth, no matter their immigration status? Again, select all that apply. The options are classes for only refugee students, educational content that is accessible to all English learners, free public education, free transportation for students without a fixed permanent residence, and then lastly, classes for newcomer parents to attend with their children. Give just a few more seconds for any more responses. They're continuing to roll in here. Yeah, so yes, as is shown here, the correct answers would be educational content that is accessible for all English learners, free public education, and free transportations for students without a fixed permanent residence. While the other options are things that can be pursued at other moments, they are not required to provide these services to all newcomer youth. So the true or false question is next. No refugee student has access to high quality education before arriving in the US. There's a very clear majority. You could, it's interesting that some of you are choosing unsure. Yes, there is an option for students not to have access to high quality education before arriving in the States. But it would be false to say that no refugee student has access to high quality education before arriving in the US. Thank you all for your participation here. The last question here, true or false? According to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, resettled youth should be placed in classrooms with students their age. Yes, true. Yes. So thank you all for participating in the in this Menti. We're going to move forward, and at this point in the presentation, I'll hand it back to Megan, who will walk us through some practical strategies in supporting newcomer students in school settings.
Right. Thank you so much, Sean. So, all right, first and foremost, when we talk about supporting refugee youth, one of the most important shifts we can make is adjusting our own perceptions. So first of all, we always want to use a trauma-informed approach. We want to acknowledge the potentially traumatic experiences that refugee youth and their families have endured throughout their forced displacement and respond with empathy and curiosity rather than judgment. Instead of thinking, what's wrong with this student? We ask ourselves instead, what happened to them? Thinking about it in that way, that small shift can help us see behaviors as signs of resilience and survival. It's also important to talk about the power imbalances between providers or teachers and refugee youth. So we hold a great deal of power in the relationship, not only because of our differences in age and the roles that we play in their lives just inherently have a power imbalance, but also because we hold the institutional, cultural, and linguistic knowledge that they're still developing. So it's important that we start by recognizing these power dynamics and how they show up in our work with refugee youth and families. It's essential that we acknowledge that youth and families are the experts on their own experiences, and we don't assume that we know what's best for them. When we center their voices and experiences and really shine a light on their strengths, we move from a model of helping or saviorism to one of true partnership. So our goal is to support respect, belonging, and empowerment, not guilt, pity, or dependency. Okay, and so in our last webinar, we talked a bit about trauma and how our brains react in response to frightening or traumatic events. We're not going to go into detail on that today, but I did just want to remind our audience that from a neurobiological perspective, when you experience something frightening, your brain enters into that survival mode. That fight, flight, or freeze mode gets activated, and the prefrontal cortex of the brain shuts down. So that's important to this conversation today because the prefrontal cortex is the area of the brain that's responsible for logical thinking, focusing, and planning. So I'm going to repeat that. When someone, anyone, is in a situation where they don't feel safe, the part of their brain that's responsible for focusing, logical thinking, learning new information, and long-term planning, it goes offline and it's not working. So if a student in a classroom doesn't feel safe or is feeling triggered, no matter how great the lesson plan is, they're going to struggle to learn and remember the information that's being taught. So it's really essential that we focus on creating safe environments for children to learn, especially children who've been exposed to multiple traumatic events like refugee youth most often have, because their brains become wired to constantly scan for threats and much more quickly go into that survival mode at the first sign of danger. All right, so when we're talking about supporting newcomer students' safety, we want to both consider psychological safety, so the sense that it's okay for them to express themselves, to ask for help, and to make mistakes without fear of judgment or exclusion, and physical safety. So, next time you're in a school, try to think about how a student with a trauma history who may have lived through experiences like war or other frightening experiences, how they might feel in your school walking around. Try to see it through their eyes and think about physical safety. Being proactive in preventing and responding to bullying in schools is also going to be key when creating safety for newcomer students. So refugee and newcomer youth may face teasing or harassment tied to language, culture, or religion. Clear anti-bullying policies, staff training, and consistent responses are essential to protecting students' well-being. Next, we always want to stay informed and connected with community resources. So partnering with the local resettlement and community organizations, interpreters, and mental health providers helps schools bridge cultural and language gaps and provide wraparound support to students and families. And that can really help us support youth safety in all areas of their life, in school, at home, and in the community. All right, so next up, we have some tips on supporting the academic success of newcomers, really drawing on those strengths-based and trauma-informed approaches. So first, assist with school enrollment, for resettled youth, and enrollment into additional programs like youth mentoring or after-school recreational or homework clubs. Newcomer youth and families often face barriers during enrollment, from navigating documentation to understanding school systems. So when schools can take an active role in helping families complete enrollment, we ensure that they don't fall through the cracks. And of course, this is also something that resettlement agencies help with as well. Build individualized academic assistance plans to meet students where they are. Because each newcomer student arrives with unique educational backgrounds, creating an individualized plan, whether that's with a formalized IEP or just informal learning supports, can really allow educators to meet students where they are and set achievable growth-oriented goals. Next, create a space where all students can feel a sense of belonging. So we were just talking about that psychological safety, and we know that a sense of belonging is foundational to their success. So when classrooms and schools make space for students to share about their cultures, their languages, and their experiences, can really help them feel safe and valued in the school. Small actions like displaying multilingual signs, celebrating cultural holidays, and encouraging students' stories can show that their identities are assets and not obstacles. All right. So next up, relationships are a foundational part of learning, especially for newcomer students who are adjusting to a new culture and language. Taking time to learn about their interests, strengths, and stories communicate that they are seen and they're valued. And of course, it's just as important to help them connect with their classmates. So explore the use of classroom cohort models, peer mentorship models, and psychosocial support groups as options to help newcomer students connect to one another. But I'll add one caveat to that, which is to make sure that students volunteer for peer mentorship opportunities. So we don't ever want to make assumptions that two students are going to be friends or they're going to get along because they have a similar background. And we don't want to single out youth as peer mentors solely based on their identity, unless they've expressed an interest in doing so. Okay, our next tip here is predictable routines provide a sense of security, especially for students who've experienced instability. When they know what to expect each day, they can really focus their energy on learning instead of worrying about what's next. But flexibility matters too. We want to leave space for some spontaneity and some organic discussions, throughout the day as well. And finally, frame setbacks as opportunities for growth. Newcomer students often face steep learning curves, linguistically, academically, and socially. When we frame mistakes as part of the learning process, we help build resilience and confidence. So using phrases like, this is how we grow, or we all learn by trying, can really model a growth mindset and remind students that progress, not perfection, is our goal. Okay, so we've got one more Mentimeter question for you. What are some ways that you have supported refugee youth school success inside and outside the educational setting? So again, we want to provide another opportunity to hear from you all. What types of things have you done to support refugee school success, either inside of schools or outside of schools? Okay, and I'm seeing the results coming through. Having a family navigator, ESL classes, educating on expectations, providing transportation, that's great. Mentoring, home visits, fantastic. What else? Refugee youth leadership, therapy services, outreach support, parent trainings. Oh my gosh, there's so many coming through. Halal food. I love that. So many times students can't eat the food that's served to them for free lunch. University campus tours, having liaisons, providing options. All right, so many coming through. Doing check-in calls, contacting the school, cultural celebrations, providing language support, matching with volunteers. There are so many ideas here. This is really awesome. Thank you all. Okay, it looks like it's slowing down. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and move forward. So this next slide, we have some ideas that we wanted to share with you all about culturally responsive strategies that we can use in the educational settings. So we want to talk about how we can make newcomer students feel welcomed and supported as they're adjusting. So first point here, we want to allow students to speak in their heritage languages and use translation tools or supports. When students can draw on their strongest language to express ideas, they're going to build confidence and bridge understanding while they continue to develop those English skills. Next, we can use visual aids, props, and demonstrations to reinforce language development. Visuals help make learning concrete and accessible, especially for students who are still learning academic English. We can also include projects that celebrate cultural differences. When students have the chance to share traditions, holidays, or personal stories, it can build pride and help classmates learn from another. Along with that, it's helpful to incorporate cultural sharing opportunities in class or school events, and when needed, provide interpretation so that all students and families can fully participate. Next up, visual representation matters. So when we decorate the school and display posters that reflect different cultures, students see themselves mirrored in the environment, which sends a really powerful message of belonging. And finally, engaging parents and families is essential. Offering clear communication, interpretation, and invitations to participate in school life helps families feel connected. And when families are engaged, students thrive. I mean, I definitely saw this come through on our last Mentimeter question there. And folks were saying, get parents in, provide outreach, talk to parents. Super, super helpful and necessary, really. So together, all of these practices can help newcomer students feel seen, valued, and supported, both, of course, academically and personally. All right, and next up, we'll share some tips that we have for you for supporting newcomer school success outside of the school setting. So even when we're out of the classroom, there's still a lot that we can do that's going to support newcomer students' academic success. First, it's important to help families understand what to expect in U.S. schools. So things like homework, attendance, and communication with teachers. We can also encourage consistent routines at home since predictability helps students feel safe and ready to learn. Next, Sean gave us a lot of really helpful information about students' rights and responsibilities. So we want to make sure that we share that information with students and their families directly. So when families know their rights, they can better advocate for their children and make sure that their children are receiving all of the services that they need and that they are entitled to. We can also share community resources, so local school supply drives, tutoring programs, family events, and make sure that this information is available in families' home languages so that it's translated flyers so that they know what's going on and they can understand it in their language. For older youth, it's helpful to explore career and education pathways early on. So introducing them to college prep programs, mentorships, or vocational training so that they can see really clear options for their future from the beginning. Supporting basic needs is just as essential. So making sure families are connected with food, housing, healthcare, mental health resources ensures that students can get all their needs met and then they can just focus on learning. And finally, encourage participation in extracurricular activities. Clubs, sports, and art programs help newcomer students to make friends, to practice their English, and feel a sense of belonging. So when families are informed, they're connected, they're supported, newcomer students can have a much stronger foundation for success, both in and outside of school. All right. And then next, I just want to briefly share two checklists that you might find helpful when you're having those conversations with students and caregivers about their responsibilities when it comes to attending school in the US. So I'm not going to read through every point here, but generally these checklists talk about their responsibilities for following the dress code, arriving to school on time, and maintaining a safe and healthy school environment. So this first checklist, as seen here, is to guide conversations with youth. And then we have a second one here, and this one is geared towards caregivers. So, of course, you're going to have access to both of these when you download the slides. You can print these out and use these as you see fit. Okay. And so now we're going to move into our third and final case scenario. So we've looked now at some trauma-informed and strengths-based strategies. We've learned from another lots of great ideas to support newcomer students. And we're going to now hear another story of another newcomer student. And I would say listen for opportunities to implement some of the practical strategies from this section to better support this youth.
Hi, my name is Idris. I am 11 years old. I am the youngest in my family, and I live here in America with my mother and 4 older siblings. My family is from Somalia, but I was born in the world's largest refugee camp in Dadaab, Kenya. Before coming to America, I only knew life in the camp. When I was 5 years old, I was sent to Islamic classes at the madrasa before I began my formal education. The old school I attended was overcrowded and did not have many funds or teachers. Still, I've always loved school, especially reading and history. 3 years ago, my family and I were able to come to America through the Refugee Admissions Program. My religion is very important to me, but kids at school don't understand. They tease me for not eating pork in the cafeteria and wearing pants even when it's hot out. I wish my friends from Kenya could come to school with me here in America and play soccer together. The school asked my mom to come in to talk, but she can't understand the voicemail they leave her because they are in English. They don't understand that she works long hours.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that video about Idris. And of course, now we want to hear your ideas. We are going to open up the chat again so you can respond just directly in the chat. And our first question is, how might you support Idris's integration and success both in and outside of the classroom? So again, thinking through some of those strategies that we've discussed, what steps might you take in your role, whether that's as a resettlement staff or an education staff? What steps might you take to support the student in or outside the classroom? Okay, and I'm seeing some responses. Ensure translation and interpretation for his parents. Great. Advocate for him and teach him to advocate for himself as well. Yeah, that's a really great idea. Let's see. Play social emotional support and learning games. That's lovely. Use interpretation translation apps for texting with parents. That would be very helpful. Then his mom could know what the school is trying to talk to him about. Sign him up for soccer. Work with the mom on translation, interpretation line. Work around the mom's schedule to assist. Connect him to his friends from his home country. Oh, he would love that. In-class support for the student and home visits to build the relationship with families and learn their needs. A school tour with the family, including interpretation. Awesome. Awareness campaign for peers. Yeah, that's a great idea. All right. These are great. Thank you so much. Pair them with supportive peers. Okay. You guys have lots of great ideas. This is so wonderful. We're going to go ahead and move on to the second part of this. So we just have another discussion question. We're going to leave the chat open, but we wanted to just provide maybe a more open-ended way to hear from everyone on the call today we know that we always have folks with tons of experience with us, and we just really didn't want to miss the opportunity to learn from you all. So if there's anything else that we haven't mentioned or that you haven't mentioned yet in the chat that you feel is a helpful strategy to support newcomer student success, we'd love to have you enter that in the chat right now. Okay, I'm going to keep my eye on the chat for anything new I see coming through. Pairing up with supportive peers, absolutely. Connecting with other students from his own country. Oh, help advocate. Middle and high school students are paired with a student who speaks their language for a few days. I bet that that really helps ease that transition. Connecting newcomer youth stories to grassroots organizing. That's super cool. All right. We host family meetings at a nearby apartment complex whose students attend our school. Nice. Build in SEL supports in their L1. Connect the minor and his family to a group in his community that practice their religion. Yeah, so making sure that we're making connections out in the community as well. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone. We're going to leave this chat open for just a little bit longer. If anyone else has any more strategies that you want to drop in there that you've used in your work, that you've seen used, that were helpful, and we can all just keep learning from each other as we continue along. So I'm going to pass it back over to Sean.
Thanks, Megan. These are some great strategies that Megan just shared, and so as we have the remaining minutes of this presentation, we want to conclude by hearing from you about some of your feedback and share some resources with you. We'll keep the chat going. There's some really great responses that y'all are talking about, and this is a community where we can learn from each other, and so we want to continue to provide that opportunity. But in reflection, some of the takeaways that we hope you have from this presentation are an increased awareness of how newcomer youth's experiences before and after arriving in the U.S. may impact their adjustment to success in school. Second of all, that you have more knowledge about the educational rights, responsibilities, services, and supports available to refugee youth and their families. And then, as I shared, Megan really provided some really great practical strategies on how to help refugee youth integrate and succeed into U.S. school systems and beyond. And so at this point, this is our final kind of reflection, and we want to hear from you in the chat. We would love to know what is one strategy or piece of new information that you've taken away from this training that you hope to implement in supporting refugee youth and their families that you are currently working with or have the intention to work with in the future. You can just drop those in the chat. Give a second for everybody to think about something. I like the idea that behavior is a mode of communication. Yeah, that was a really incredible point that Megan made. We'll support newcomers in feeling valued, seen, and welcomed. Yes, that's extremely important. What to expect slide. Yeah, these are great checklists that you can we hope that you utilize in the future, and you can basically just print it out, use it as is. The emphasis on working closely with parents and families. That is such an important strengthening factor that helps youth and their families to be resilient when the family is brought into this process. Love the stories of newcomer students. Thank you. Yeah. cultivating our relationship with student and their family is extremely helpful. Yes. Um, so these are really great. Thank you. Your chat will stay open, and we'd love to hear more from more of you about what was really impactful for you. But as I see, the Q&A does not have or has a couple questions that still need to be answered. So as you give me a second to go through them, um, we'd love for you to fill out a quick little survey to offer feedback for today's webinar. It's really invaluable to us, so that as you take that time, it will only help us to improve and shape our future trainings. So Laura will paste a link to that survey in the chat while I look through the questions here real quick. This is a really great question that we received, that there's a newcomer student who is afraid to ask or dislikes asking for um, his classmates' help. So this person is wondering whether or not this is a struggle that other people have faced, and how have they encountered that situation. So I think uh, for some youth who come from cultures where it can be seen as a weakness to ask for help, that they may be more akin to being independent, it can be really challenging. They don't want to show weakness. So really, I think a really great strategy for approaching this student would be to remind them that this isn't a value statement on them whether or not they need help, or they ask for help from others. In fact, we can grow and be shaped, and can benefit from the input of other people. Megan, do you have anything else that you would add to that question itself, or how you would answer that?
Yeah, I think that yeah, that's a really great start. And I think that that's worth exploring with the student about where that comes from. And that student might be worried about feeling like a burden on his classmates. And I think that if classmates are kind of put in the situation where they have to interpret for other students, it really can create this weird dynamic or power imbalance, that's actually, I think the student has kind of a point there. And so I might either talk with the other student who is asking for help often, how that student feels about helping, and I might see what other supports that we can incorporate. So if there's interpretation or translation apps that we might be able to rely on at times to give that other student a break. Those are just two areas I might look into.
The person with the question also followed up by saying that the teacher often deflects this young person's questions to his classmates instead of asking for or answering that themselves. So I think another thing, as we talked about, was the different roles, the different expectations across cultures of how teachers and students interact. If they maybe come from a place where the teacher is the authority figure, is the one who has all the answers, has the right answers, and they're just trying to memorize and repeat those answers back as the teacher has communicated them. I would kind of, to Megan's point, try to have a conversation with the young person about the importance of critical thinking, and how and kind of the expectations of participation in the class, and how knowledge isn't necessarily held by one person alone. Anything that you would add to that follow-up, Megan?
No, no. But I'm seeing a couple other questions. We have just a few minutes left. I would like to just answer this next question, if that's all right.
Yeah.
There was a question about whether or not our presentation would address the potential need for mental health treatment with cultural sensitivity. And just wanted to say that no, during this presentation, we didn't have a lot of time to get into mental health treatment, but I really like the way that you phrased your question about the potential needs. So I just want to say that not every student, just because they come from a background of forced displacement, or if they might have experienced traumatic events in the past, that does not mean that every student is going to need mental health treatment. But for those that do, absolutely, we definitely recommend finding partners that can provide that treatment with cultural sensitivity. Often schools might have integrated mental health treatment. They might have therapists on campus, or you might need to look into finding some community resources to make referrals. But just wanted to thank that person for putting that question in the Q&A.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go into our last section here about some resources. So the Refugee Youth Resource Center has launched our website, which is a growing hub of support for providers working with refugee youth like yourselves. This site will, you'll find our webinar recordings, including today's session, that will be uploaded later on. And we will also be providing a range of practical tools for providers, refugee youth, and their families. We all are also in the process of building our national network of resources. So if you click here, you'll see that. So on this site, we continue to expand with new partners, materials, and supports in the months ahead. But we invite you to bookmark the site and continue to check it out. If your organization is looking for a deeper, more targeted assistance, our training and technical assistance request form can be found under For Providers. And this is a place where you can request a training. So here are some topics that we have that might be of interest, but you can also just request specifically others. If your organization is looking for a deeper, and finally, we want to highlight our case consultation provider helpline. If the helpline is confidential, free, and is designed for providers who are in need of case-specific guidance. So you can fill out that request here. You can call the number here, or you can email Refugee Youth Provider Helpline at refugees.org. We hope that this resource center will become a reliable resource and partner in your work with refugee youth and their families. And we'll drop a link in the chat, as Laura just did, so you can explore everything and stay connected as the site continues to grow. So as we jump back here, here are some tools, whether it be books, toolkits, guides that we have linked here for you to follow up with. There are also links to places where you can get multicultural, multilingual materials, whether that be to read books from other cultures, post visuals around your school or in your offices from various cultures. These are some great publishing houses that you can find books and materials like this. And lastly, here are additional resources. We want to highlight some resources from Switchboard, including communities of practice where you can gather with other people who have similar interests and talk about how you can better support refugee youth that you're working with. So that is our presentation for today. We're at 3:30 exactly. We have our December webinar Preventing and Responding to Placement Breakdowns Involving Newcomer Children and Youth on Wednesday, December 17th from 2 to 3:30 Eastern Time. So we'd love for you to join us. Save the date. And thank you again for joining today's webinar. Many blessings.